Welcome everyone to another episode of the Academy Critic, where today we're going to be looking at the 88th Academy Awards honoring films released in 2015. Now, I haven't seen any of the short films, but I must say I was a little surprised to see that Lava didn't get nominated. But without further ado, let's look at the original songs. The nominees being Till It Happens to You from The Hunting Ground, Simple Song Number 3 from Youth, Manta Ray from Racing Extinction, Earned It from 50 Shades of Grey, and Writings on the Wall from Spectre. Okay, did not know, I've obviously heard Earned It before, did not know it was from 50 Shades of Grey, but a lot of these songs have they're all pretty good. Manta Ray from Racing Extinction has a pretty melancholic tone to it, but at the end of the day, I actually haven't watched any of these movies. So I'm going to move us on to the original score nominees, which are Star Wars The Force Awakens, Sicario, Carol, Bridge of Spies, and The Hateful Eight. Alright, real quickly, gotta mention a couple of snubs. First of all, Michael Giacchino's nowhere to be seen here, even though he did both Inside Out and Jurassic World, which both have very good scores. Now, for Inside Out, listen to Bundle of Joy by Michael Giacchino, and if you want to hear his best song from Jurassic World, listen to As the Jurassic World Turns. I also want to throw out the Revenant main theme, not a Michael Giacchino movie, but the Revenant has a really great main theme. So, yeah. Few snubs there, but without further ado, let's get into Star Wars The Force Awakens. It's about time we talked about a nominated John Williams Star Wars score. This movie does really, more than the other two movies in the sequel trilogy, really adds to, just the classic Star Wars melodies. It doesn't feel like something separate in terms of its music. It just fits in perfectly with some of the best scores of all time, honestly. The best songs here are Rey's theme, which has a spectacular use of bells and is an instantly iconic melody for the lead of the trilogy. March of the Resistance and Kylo Ren arrives at the battle. Really great score here by John Williams. A lot of really great bangers. While the Kylo Ren theme isn't obviously as iconic as something like the Imperial March, it is quite memorable, and March of the Resistance has a really hype energy to it. In all honesty, John Williams is probably the best thing about this movie trilogy. Sicario, on the other hand, has a much darker score. I'm actually not always even certain how, some of the songs were made. My favorite song from the score is The Beast, which I don't even know what instruments were used, but it has this growing oppressive sound that moves subtly and unstoppably, creating a really uneasy sense of atmosphere. Is pretty effective, honestly. Bridge of Spies is one of the few instances where Steven Spielberg and John Williams weren't collaborating. However, Spielberg didn't cheap out on the score, and he did get Thomas Newman, who, we love him here. He's a very remarkable talent, and this is a great example of that, even though I don't quite think he stands up to John Williams. While The Hateful Eight is not my favorite nominee here, even though it won, the overdue Oscar for Ennio Morricone was very satisfying to see. Ultimately, he has a lot of really great iconic scores. The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, for example. Cinema Paradiso. He's just done amazing work, none of which received him really an Oscar. But the Hateful Eight, is the one that finally did it, even if I would have preferred The Force Awakens to win this award. The nominees for Best Sound Mixing are Star Wars The Force Awakens, The Revenant, The Martian, Bridge of Spies, and Mad Max Fury Road, with the only snub I'm going to throw out here being Jurassic World. I was a little surprised that didn't make it in, but these are all really good. Let's start with Star Wars The Force Awakens. The sound mixing in pretty much all the Star Wars movies is pretty undeniable. Star Wars overall has pretty much mastered the technical elements of filmmaking, and the sound is just an absolute standout example of it. You listen to the unique sound of Kylo Ren's lightsaber, sounds absolutely amazing, as do all of the ships. All you gotta do is listen to this movie, and you will very soon see the impeccability of the sound design. Rivers, guns, forests, animals, and more. The Revenant's sound design manages to hurl you into nature in a way that is just the untouched American frontier, just chucks you into the very center of it, that is both unquestionable as well as immersive. All right, speaking about The Martian, this award category has always, had a nice soft spot for science fiction. It would admittedly be weird if this movie, The Martian, won over something like The Force Awakens, which is handling a lot more, in my opinion. But that the sound it's not just the spacecraft, also the storms, the debris, all of it is very effective, and you can see all the great work that was really put into the sound mixing on The Martian. Bridge of Spies is kind of the unexpected pick. It's not a movie that, when I'm thinking of it, I think of the sound mixing, particularly because most of the movie scenes involve talking. There's one scene with a shooting. Actually, there's a couple scenes with a shooting, but even still, it's pretty good. The scene that stands out the most when I think of the sound is got to be the U-2 spy plane crash sequence, which is really, really good. But yeah, apart from that, I think it would be really weird, obviously, if this were to beat pretty much any of the other nominees, but especially the winner of this award, Mad Max Fury Road. There is countless moving parts in this movie, quite literally. I mean, all the cars, the weapons, the storms, but even still, this award is less focused on, I think, the quantity of how much stuff is going on and more so about the quality of the sound mixing itself, which quite frankly is completely flawless. I think this is a very deserving award. The nominees for sound editing are Star Wars The Force Awakens, Sicario, The Revenant, The Martian, and Mad Max Fury Road. Obviously, The Force Awakens was going to pull through. I've already spoken about how amazing the sound design and mixing is in this movie, but that extends into the editing and how it fits into the film that we're seeing itself. And it fits in pretty great. It's quite flawless, so I'm not surprised to see it here at all. Sicario is the only movie that was nominated for sound editing but not sound mixing. They, like I always say, they are almost identical, categories, generally speaking. The movie they swapped out for was Bridge of Spies, which is the movie that I would have gotten rid of too. But why does Bridge of Spies have better sound mixing, but Sicario has better sound editing? I honestly probably couldn't quite tell you. I mean, the sound editing in The Revenant totally rules. It does just disappear into the scenery and adds to the storytelling, quite frankly. Sound is edited into The Martian. Pretty on point. The Foley is effective. It plays alongside the movie we're seeing rather flawlessly. It's pretty spectacular fashion, actually. I don't really have anything bad to say in terms of the sound editing about any of the nominees given. They're all pretty effective, but there is one movie that sounds better than them all. And guess what? It's Mad Max Fury Road. So much is happening in this movie, and the sound does not fall behind at all. It manages to keep up with the rest of the movie and even elevate the film to give a heightened sense of excitement and awareness as to what's happening on screen. It is a pretty loud movie, but I think it's which is great. I wouldn't have it any other way, and I wouldn't have given this award to any other movie. The nominees for Best Visual Effects are Star Wars The Force Awakens, The Revenant, The Martian, Mad Max Fury Road, and Ex Machina. The only snub I'm going to throw in here is Jurassic World. That's another movie that it's kind of surprising when you look back on it. Even the technical awards, like Jurassic World, got nominated for nothing. It's like, oh, really? Because it's pretty good at the visual effects and stuff. But without further ado, let's talk about Star Wars: The Force Awakens. Find one frame of this movie that doesn't look real. It's actually a pretty tough task, which is really impressive considering what is being put on screen. There's a lot of effort being put into the CGI, and it really shows. The ships look great, the planets look great, the explosions look great, Starkiller Base is gorgeous. The battles are extremely convincing. There is just so much to glaze when it comes to the CGI, but really all you have to do is look at it and understand why it deserves to be here. On top of all the CGI, there's a lot of practical effects that give the world a very tangible factor. Just look at the scene on Takodana in Maz's castle. The amount of practical effects in that scene is really awesome to behold. And heck, even Rey's bread that grows from dust into a full-on loaf when added water, even that is a real effect. But yeah, just the planets, the practical effects, the CGI, it's all pretty amazing looking, and they did a really great job, and this movie totally deserves to be here. Unlike Star Wars, which obviously uses a lot of CGI, The Revenant actually kind of blends them to the point where I'm not always sure what's real and what's not. There are some things that are a little bit obvious, like the cliff scene in which Leo's not riding a real horse. On top of that, the bear is obviously fake. I don't say that because it looks fake. In fact, it looks great. I just know that that's not something that they put Leo through. But yeah, looks really, really good. Okay, moving from that onto The Martian. Just gotta say that all the shots of space look beautiful. All the shots of Earth from space look super real. All the shots of the spaceship leaving Mars are really cool. Mars itself looks awesome. I know that the immediate set is real, but the background can't be real. I mean, the thing is, I don't know where the set ends and the visual effects begin. They simply just look too good, both of them. One of the few technical awards that this movie didn't win, Mad Max Fury Road still manages to have incredible visual effects. What's surprising is how much of this movie is practical. Some stunts are real and that they're simply layered over other shots of real explosion and it all looks, just completely crazy. But on top of all the practical effects, there is a good amount of CGI as well, which pairs with the practical effects really nicely, making for a very, very visually pleasing film. But the winner of this award was not Mad Max Fury Road, it was Ex Machina. So although I probably would have voted for Star Wars, Ex Machina does have pretty strong VFX. They go pretty crazy. It's not as drenched in VFX as some of the movies we just talked about, but when it is used, it looks great. One of the main reasons this movie is winning is probably because of the way it meshes the VFX with real actors, blending the CGI with reality in a way that brings the robots in this movie to life in an extremely believable way. The nominees for Best Cinematography are Sicario, Mad Max Fury Road, The Hateful Eight, Carol, and The Revenant. This is a pretty spectacular set of nominees. I haven't seen Carol, but I've seen everything else, and I wouldn't swap any of the things I've seen out for this, but I did want to mention the fact that Embrace of the Serpent has really, really good cinematography as well. But without further ado, let's talk about Sicario. I've talked about Denis Villeneuve a couple times over the course of the last couple of videos, and finally I can talk about one of his movies actually getting a cinematography nomination. Roger Deakins, which is his cinematographer for this movie, makes a truly beautiful film here. I've spoken of Denis films before in terms of their framing, lighting, and focus, and that's all present here as well. The focus is super poignant and intentional with every shot. Furthermore, the use of color is very pleasing to the eye. There is some surprising use of blue on occasion, but the colors that really dominate the screen are orange and yellow. When we talk about the lighting, I think what makes this movie interesting is how dark it is. It uses darkness in a spectacular fashion that drapes the whole story in darkness, alluding to the moral corruption that is taking place in the shadows. Also, I have to take a moment to highlight the most iconic shot in the film when the soldiers are going incognito and they literally just vanish into the darkness. It just looks so amazing. All right, moving on from that, we're going to talk about Mad Max Fury Road. And unlike Sicario, Fury Road is a very bright movie most of the time. However, what it has in common with Sicario is a prevalence of color, the color orange especially. However, Mad Max commits way harder to its color palette, making it a very striking movie visually. On top of the color, I love how vibrant the reds are. Wherever there's a fire or explosion of some sort, it's not just the typical orange that you see in the desert most of the movie. It's a vibrant red that's just gorgeous. The nighttime scenes also have a strong use of color, but they are far more dedicated to the blues than anything else. It all just pops off the screen. It just looks like absolutely beautiful. It's a very visually stunning movie, and it deserves to be here for sure. As does The Hateful Eight, which the first thing I noticed about the Hateful Eight cinematography is how wide the aspect ratio is. You get used to it, but it really is a wide movie. However, that decision begins to make sense once you realize how many landscape shots are in this movie. All of them looking beautiful, by the way. It is hard to make nature look unbeautiful. But some of the shots on the cabin as well, where the movie goes down, looks really, really great as well. The lighting in some of the shots, it's just really, really gorgeous all around. So, yeah, beautiful movie for sure. But the winner of this award was The Revenant. And I do think that this movie deserves the win. Although all of these movies are stunning, I gotta say, I don't even know where to begin here. I know I talked a lot about the landscape shots in The Hateful Eight, and there are even more of them here. However, that is not to say that they're not shot without a whole lot of tact. It captures the unique beauty of the mountains, the snow, the forest, and the rivers in camera wonderfully. The use of reflection on the water is beautiful. The sunsets all gorgeous. I could just go on and on, but quite frankly, the stills speak for themselves. In addition to beautiful landscape shots, the camera isn't afraid of getting up close to show us the trees, which are framed up beautifully with the night sky. Furthermore, we get shots of leaves that immerse us into the setting around us. Um, there are a few shots of fire in this movie that are extremely eye-catching. It just makes me want to pause the movie and stare at the artistic nature of the photography. This movie uses silhouettes wonderfully, making for some truly memorable and beautiful moments. There are some flashback sequences that are shot with a sense of realism. Even rather grotesque things like blood manage to have a sense of beauty to them when filmed in such a manner. I'm going to keep putting stills on screen while I talk about this, but the beginning of the movie has a 2 to 3 minute long battle sequence that is all filmed as a single long take. Stills don't really do that justice, so you really need to see the scene, or, watch the movie because it's amazing. But truly, long takes aren't really something that we've talked about yet on this channel, but they are one of the most interesting, well thought out, and fun parts of cinematography. I could go on and on about this movie, but it's just its beauty is undeniable. I am very glad that this movie won the Oscar, which is saying something considering how crazy the lineup was. All right, moving on to production design. The nominees are The Revenant, The Martian, The Danish Girl, Bridge of Spies, and Mad Max Fury Road. Not sure which of these I'd swap out. I probably wouldn't, so it's not a true snub, but I do want to mention that The Witch has very historically accurate production design. That's something Robert Eggers really prides himself in, is historical accuracy, and he does a pretty great job on The Witch. But let's talk about the actual nominees, starting with The Revenant. Although most of this movie is set in nature, there are also some really impressive sets that occur in this film. There are some church ruins which look genuinely worn. There are also some historically accurate Native American huts made out of lumps of land that look great. However, the set that sticks out to me the most is the American encampment that we see in the final act of the film. That set looks really, really impressive, honestly. But now let's speak of an extremely different set of sets in The Martian, which, we've spoken already about the immediate outside sets that resemble Mars, but where this movie really shines the interiors, not only the spaceship interiors that look great in the air, but the Ares colony on Mars has some really nice sets as well. They aren't too showy, but that's kind of the whole point. They aren't supposed to be grand, artistic, beautiful works of architecture. They're supposed to be, scientific working spaces, and as far as that, they look very convincing. Obviously, period pieces like Bridge of Spies tend to require a constant attention to detail that can oftentimes go unnoticed, with people tending to look for more grand and eye-catching sets like the Soviet courthouse. However, I think the most impressive set is that of Berlin, with the Berlin Wall splitting it down into its western and eastern sect. This creates a unique opportunity to display some of the more developed and higher quality infrastructure on the western side, kind of juxtaposing that with the distinction between that of the communist run eastern side. I think they did a really good job illustrating that, and it's pretty effective. The winner of this award is Mad Max Fury Road, which is a super interesting win just because of how untraditional it is. I would have been more inclined to assume that something like The Revenant would win, but what's cool about this win is the fact that the primary production design is the cars themselves, which are admittedly super unique and well decorated. There are other sets in the movie, but when I think of the production design of this film, I think of the cars, and that's really really awesome and cool. Even if, yeah, I'm a little surprised at the win, but they do really great work, so I shouldn't be too surprised. The nominees for Best Costume Design are The Revenant, The Danish Girl, Cinderella, Carol, and Mad Max Fury Road. Once again, not sure what I'd really swap out, and I probably wouldn't. But I just want to mention the fact that the costumes in The Witch are very historically accurate, even if they're not trying to be as showy as some other stuff. They're just accurate. But I don't. It's not like a true snub. It's just like it's like they're really doing their job, and I wanted to mention it. But let's talk about The Revenant. The attention to detail in these costumes is actually pretty crazy. It really does feel like a thing that people would have to be wearing practically for the sake of survival. They're made of animal skin and fur. They're Native American outfits as well. One thing I think is super cool about Leo's outfits is how they just get worn as he puts them through a lot. He fights animals in them, wears them in a river, is almost buried in them. And the costume department takes all of this into account and has to, progress it through the story, in addition to making great costumes for everyone else in the movie. Okay, let's speak now about Cinderella. These costumes are way less rustic than The Revenant. They are designed to be flashy and showy and eye-catching. They are not going under anyone's radar. They are designed to catch your eye and demand attention. I must say that they did a pretty good job. There are some truly beautiful costumes here, with the most obvious one being the iconic blue dress. The costume department actually ensured that Cinderella was the only one wearing blue at the ball, which, although is super unrealistic, does serve the purpose of the movie. But the winner of this award was Mad Max Fury Road. So these costumes are designed to be thrown together, post-apocalyptic outfits. The one I immediately think of is the iconic face mask that Max had to wear while he was strapped to the grill of the car. However, that's not even the most impressive face mask in the movie. Immortan Joe's face mask is instantly eye-catching, memorable, and iconic, probably being ultimately the best costume from this movie. Now, moving on from costume design, the nominees for makeup and hairstyling are The Revenant, The 100-Year-Old Man Who Climbed Out the Window and Disappeared, and Mad Max Fury Road. Alright, speaking first about The Revenant. I mean, Leo throughout this movie is just slowly getting blisters, sunburns, etc., cuts. Leo's character is put through the ringer in this movie, and it happens so gradually that it isn't always the most notable, but the final shot of the movie really sells how effective the makeup was in this movie. It's a pretty great shot. But the winner of this award was, not much of a surprise here, Mad Max Fury Road. Already talked about Immortan Joe. His makeup is really, really great, as is his long white hair. I think this is the first time that, at least that we've talked about it, probably not the first year, but that it goes from makeup to makeup and hairstyling. They kind of group it into one category, although I think the makeup still tends to dominate the big bulk of this category and this award. But all of his minions as well are covered in makeup. It is funny that Mad Max is winning for having people just covered in white makeup from the waist up with some black around the eyes, but that's kind of trite. It's pretty great work, actually, and I can't think of anything with better makeup, quite frankly. Now, the nominees for Best Film Editing are Star Wars The Force Awakens, Spotlight, The Revenant, The Big Short, and Mad Max Fury Road. All right, it's pretty crazy that a movie like Star Wars The Force Awakens got into the editing race. It actually makes me kind of wonder how close it was to Picture, given that, the editing tends to actually be rather telling in terms of what could get into Best Picture. After all, The Force Awakens is the only movie here that wasn't nominated for Best Picture. And while I can't really speak on what the vibes were at the time because I wasn't really following awards yet, I do know that the Critics' Choice Awards did actually nominate The Force Awakens for Best Picture. All that being said, the editing is certainly very exciting and flows very well from scene to scene. If you could say anything to try and knock the editing, you could probably argue that the general flow of the movie and the structure is a copy of the original Star Wars, which is also the only other Star Wars movie that got nominated, but also actually won the Oscar for Best Editing. But yeah, I think it deserves to be here. It's pretty great. Okay, the pacing in Spotlight is definitely a bit more subtle, a bit more low key. It's not an action packed, fast paced movie like The Force Awakens or some of the movies we're going to talk about pretty soon. It doesn't even feel as structured into three clean cut acts, but rather jumps from each Spotlight team member as they work together to uncover this truth. It flows pretty easily and is a rather easy watch. It's not an easy watch, but you know what I mean. All right, The Revenant is not a short movie. It's quite long, and actually, it's also rather slow at times. And you know what? I wouldn't have it any other way. This movie is an experience, and I think its pacing is exactly what it was meant to be. It seems very, very deliberate, and actually, the action scenes can be very fast paced and a bit more rapidly edited. Sometimes not edited if, at all if it's like a long take. Um, but yeah, they know when to cut, but also when not to cut. That's, I think, a really. It's not like, oh, the most cuts is the most edited is the best edited. Like, no, that's not true. This movie is a bit slower and has a lot of long takes in it, and I think that actually adds to the movie. And although this movie is very well edited, I do think the next two movies are the real contenders, starting with The Big Short. Once again, I don't really know what the race looked like at the time, but I feel like if Fury Road didn't win, The Big Short is kind of the next one in line to win this award, in my opinion at least. Um, just the way it jumps between characters in such a knowing manner is rather ethereal. There's an irreplaceable energy to the montages and informative voiceovers that make this movie just a joy to watch. The editing is probably actually my favorite part of this movie. It's pretty wonderful. Mad Max Fury Road is the obvious winner here. This movie is straight up cleaning up at the Oscars. They really mastered and dominated the technical elements of filmmaking. But of all the awards that they won this year, this is one of the most deserving. Um, it hits the ground running with a blast of energy that keeps the heart pounding, and it kind of keeps that up for the entire runtime of the movie, and it then proceeds not to let go of you during the entire time. I mean, the editing is pretty insane, in all honesty. Moving on to the acting awards, starting with Best Actress in a Supporting Role. The nominees are Kate Winslet in Steve Jobs, Rachel McAdams in Spotlight, Rooney Mara in Carol, Jennifer Jason Leigh in The Hateful Eight, and Alicia Vikander in The Danish Girl. Let's start off with Rachel McAdams in Spotlight. And here we have a pretty quiet performance that feels so genuine. Rachel McAdams feels like a very real person, which she is playing a real person, but she plays her in a way that I just feel like I could talk to her. Unlike one of her co-stars, who I'll get to in a minute, she doesn't have like one crazy standout scene that is carrying most of the nomination, but she is pretty consistent throughout the movie. Now, let's talk about Jennifer Jason Leigh in The Hateful Eight, who I was a little bit surprised to see here, which I don't know why. She is really, really good in the movie, but for some reason, like when I was thinking about the best like supporting actress, like who could be here, The Hateful Eight was not one of the movies that came to my mind. And that says nothing about her performance, because I mean, when you look at her performance, she is really memorable. Her character is actually more memorable than that of Rachel McAdams's, but Spotlight is just a much more Oscar-coded movie than The Hateful Eight. But yeah, she manages to be this sassy, hateful, and bitter woman that's just like rotten to the core. But yes, she handles it really, really well. The nominees for Best Actor in a Supporting Role are Sylvester Stallone in Creed, Mark Ruffalo in Spotlight, Tom Hardy in The Revenant, Christian Bale in The Big Short, and Mark Rylance in Bridge of Spies. If I were to mention one snub, I'd probably throw in Benicio del Toro from Sicario. I think he's really, really good in this movie, but all of these are as well. Let's start with Sylvester Stallone from Creed. And correct me if I'm wrong. I'm not completely sure on this, but I believe, at least this is the only one I can think of, is this the only time an actor has been nominated multiple times for the same character, for the same performance? Because like Sylvester Stallone got nominated for Best Actor back in the 70s for playing Rocky Balboa in the original Rocky, and now here in Creed, he's being nominated once again for playing Rocky Balboa. It's at least a pretty rare occasion when that happens, but it's cool to see. Um, I don't think the performance really picks up too much until the second half of the movie. Throughout most of the movie, throughout the first half of the movie, I was kind of thinking like he's like good for sure, but like why I actually liked him better than his performance in Rocky, largely because I can actually understand what he's saying a lot of the time here. But I was kind of wondering like why is he getting nominated? And then it kind of hit the fan around the hour mark, and then the last hour of the movie. I started to really understand. I was like, okay, yeah, he's doing a lot more than he was in the first half. So it is pretty good. Not one I can see winning, but a very good performance, undoubtedly. Mark Ruffalo in Spotlight is the other performance that I hinted at when I was talking about Rachel McAdams, because I mentioned that he's got one really big, scene that is probably most of the reason he's getting nominated, and that's got to be the scene where he's talking to Robbie and he just lashes out and starts yelling about trying to get the story out, and after they have their big disagreement. That's his most memorable scene in the movie, so I'm not surprised to see him here at all. In The Revenant, Tom Hardy is a really great villain. I already knew that Tom Hardy was capable of playing a cool villain because I've seen The Dark Knight Rises. But yeah, here in The Revenant, his role just feels so much more real, tangible, um, and relatable. Like the way he dodges responsibility for his actions, tries to gaslight you into thinking he's doing what's right. It's just very realistic um, character trait that is makes him that much more unlikable. And this might honestly be my favorite performance here. It's pretty wonderful. I'm a little surprised that Christian Bale is the only acting nomination from The Big Short, which is full of great performances from Brad Pitt, Ryan Gosling, and Steve Carell. Likewise, Christian Bale is really great. He does a great job playing the part of the guy who is great with numbers and, often puts that above the social aspects of his life. And he ultimately predicts the stock market crash as a result. Not a winning performance like the last time we talked about Christian Bale, but he's great nonetheless. As are, just look at the poster of this movie, and you're going to see four actors that do a really wonderful job in this movie. All right, the winner of this award was Mark Rylance for Bridge of Spies, which I was actually a little bit surprised about. Um, it is a good performance, and for a communist spy, he actually comes off as rather charming and endearing at times, making light of a rather heavy situation. However, I would have probably expected someone like Mark Ruffalo or Tom Hardy to win before Mark Rylance did. The nominees for Best Actress in a Leading Role are Saoirse Ronan in Brooklyn, Charlotte Rampling in 45 Years, Jennifer Lawrence in Joy, Cate Blanchett in Carol, and Brie Larson in Room. Room is the only nominee that I have seen, unfortunately, but it is the winner of this award, and although I haven't seen the competition, it is hard to say that Brie Larson doesn't carry this movie a lot. Her co-star, Jacob Tremblay, is also doing incredible work, especially at such a young age. But for real, she's pretty heartbreaking to watch. It's just so easy to root for her. You want her to win so badly. I know a lot of people don't like Brie Larson, but you cannot deny that she is a large part of the reason that this movie is as good as it is. The last acting category, actor in a leading role, are Eddie Redmayne in The Danish Girl, Michael Fassbender in Steve Jobs, Matt Damon in The Martian, Bryan Cranston in Trumbo, and Leonardo DiCaprio in The Revenant. I'm a little surprised that there were no acting nominations from Straight Outta Compton, but let's talk first about Matt Damon from The Martian. Matt Damon's a really good lead. The Martian isn't his deepest or most introspective performance, but it is a joy to watch. He can be serious at times, but this movie also is quite funny, so he's quite quippy as well. Still, though, he's very clearly a very talented actor, and this is one of the first movies I think of when I think of his growing filmography. In the 2010s, Bryan Cranston was at the top of his game, but it's not because of Trumbo. We all know that Breaking Bad is the career definer for Bryan Cranston. Now, I think a lot of people could kind of point to Trumbo, which came out just a couple years after Breaking Bad ended, and say, but look at this kind of highlights the range he has. However, we already knew he had range because of Breaking Bad, because before Breaking Bad, we all just associated him with the dad from Malcolm in the Middle, and then Breaking Bad was the thing that made us realize, like, wait, he can play all sorts of characters. In short, he's good in Trumbo, but it's not the movie that should be getting him any awards, especially when you look at the actual winner, Leonardo DiCaprio in The Revenant, whose award was long overdue. He's been in so many amazing movies, and he is an amazing actor and continues to be. But yeah, I mean, it was just such like an ongoing joke, the fact that he had never won an Oscar. It was long overdue, and The Revenant is a wonderful movie to give that to him. He does go through a lot in this movie, and the positions that, the places he's being put in, and the stuff he's having to do, like eat real raw meat. That, I mean, all doing that doesn't necessarily mean that it is a great performance, but it truly is. Um, I've heard people say that he grunted his way to an Oscar, but I think that's awfully trite. He's pretty great, and it was long overdue for him to get recognized. And of the three performances I've seen, it is my favorite. The nominees for Best Original Screenplay are Straight Outta Compton, Inside Out, Ex Machina, Bridge of Spies, and Spotlight. Uh, Anomalisa would be an interesting nomination here. It's yeah, that had a surprising screenplay. But let's talk first about Straight Outta Compton. This movie is well written, and I'm actually a little surprised that this is the only nomination that this movie got. On a moral level, you could ask the same questions that the ops in this movie asked. Does this art glorify gangs and drugs? And I don't think it does much in that regard that is too different from something like Goodfellas or The Wolf of Wall Street. Granted, those movies do show the eventual downfall that comes from such a lifestyle, unlike this movie, which is a huge factor. But ultimately, this movie focuses on immersing the viewer in the world of the characters. Now, Inside Out is a wildly different movie, and the movie that I actually would probably have voted for. This would have been a really cool win, especially considering that this is the last movie, as of when I'm making this video in 2026, this was the last time an animated movie got a screenplay nomination, and it is really, really deserved. Writing the emotions as characters who have to interact with each other and respond to every possible scenario from the perspective of that emotion. It's really, really well done. The whole movie is just dripping in creativity from beginning to end. It's a total Pixar classic at this point, and what it's done for kids has been very valuable, enabling them to kind of express their emotions and what they're feeling while using this movie and its characters as a guide. One of the cool things about this movie and what it does is that so the emotions are obviously characters, joy, fear, sadness, etc. And Riley is a character, but Riley is also the setting. And I've never, it's such a unique concept that I've never even seen something like that done before, where like this is a character who is the setting of other characters. It's really, really cool, and I would have loved to see it win. Ex Machina. I'm surprised to see Ex Machina in this category. I like a lot of Caleb's conversations with Ava, but I just don't see it in this category for some reason. Especially with the ending, which like I don't know. I just don't see it. It was kind of funny to see the interactions with the AI in this movie and compare it to how we treat AI now. Like there's the scene where Ava shows Caleb a painting that she made, and he's like, like, wow, like she made this painting and it's beautiful, like it made art. Even though like that's what we call slop these days. It's just like the ugliest thing ever. Like obviously it looked like a real painting because it was physically done, not generated. But it was just kind of funny to see that. Where I'm like, wait, that's just AI slop. But this is before AI slop existed, so I'll give the movie a break, I guess. Um, but yeah, I don't know why I was surprised to see it here. The screenplay for Bridge of Spies is quite patriotic, and it very deliberately shows a big distinction between how the Soviet Union treated imprisoned spies during the Cold War compared to how the US did. It does feel like a movie that Spielberg uh, would go for in that regard. And I know that it was written by the Coen brothers. I know that now. I didn't know that. I found that out like a few days ago, and I was like, really? Like the Coen brothers wrote this movie? Um, but yeah, I was surprised because of how like optimistic and hopeful it is. Whereas I'm used to them. I mean, some of their screenplays, especially something like No Country for Old Men, is much darker and a bit more pessimistic. But yeah, I was like, wow, the Coen brothers, good for them. It's great. But yeah. Like I said, very patriotic movie, which is right up my alley, and also dives into justice systems that make that America operate under, and the rights given to communist spies during the Cold War. I know that's not the whole picture for every single individual's like in every individual scenario like this, but this movie is based off of a pretty incredible true story. If Inside Out had to lose to anything, I'm glad it was Spotlight. It's a very dense dive into uncovering truly horrific crimes as well as their cover-ups. And there is a lot of talking in this movie, but it's all really well written, quite frankly. The movie doesn't follow a single protagonist. I suppose you could argue that Michael Keaton has the most screen time, but honestly, the whole Spotlight team seems to share screen time fairly equally. Um, but yeah, most films follow a single protagonist who has a supporting cast whereas pretty much everyone in this movie feels like a supporting actor. Despite this, it manages to work quite well because Spotlight itself is the main character. It is a true team movie in which everyone is working together for a common goal, and I think that's what makes it work better than you would expect. Because the idea of a protagonist, most movies they have a protagonist, and this protagonist has goals that they're trying to achieve, but there's conflict in the way. While there is some internal conflict, like within the Spotlight team, the primary conflict is getting the story made itself. So because all of the individual team members of the Spotlight team have a unified goal, they can kind of act collectively as one protagonist, if that makes sense. And yeah, I think it was pretty interesting. The nominees for Best Adapted Screenplay are Room, The Martian, Carol, Brooklyn, and The Big Short. Let's talk first about Room, which I absolutely love. I actually think this movie's not talked about enough. I was surprised at how much I loved this movie. Um, it is heartbreaking and hopeful at the same time. There's a great level of innocence that clashes with the drab background um, that the movie's set in, which is quite fitting for a movie that's largely about the preservation and protection of innocence. Yeah, it's just a really beautiful story. The only big critique I have about the script is that in the latter half of the movie, Ma's talking to this reporter, um, uh, who inquires about the morality of keeping Jack, her son, during her captivity. And all the question did make me hate the reporter. It is a fair question, that Ma as well as the audience is kind of forced to chew on, but they don't really do much with that question. It doesn't really go anywhere. They just kind of present it and then carry on with the film. I think the screenwriter wanted to address that because it is really interesting, but didn't want to commit to derailing the whole narrative of the story, which is more so about the codependence between Ma and Jack. The Martian, Saving Private Ryan, Interstellar, The Odyssey. The amount of movies dedicated to getting Matt Damon home is insane. But this is a pretty definitive one. Um, I actually got to see this one in theaters when it came out 11 years ago, and I thought it was amazing then, and my feelings on it, quite frankly, have not changed since. I rewatched it for this video, and yeah, it was a great time. It's quite funny, almost pushing into comedic territory, despite being a drama at its core. But some lightheartedness is necessary for a movie like this, unless they're going to commit pretty holistically to a very serious tone, like the other movies that I just listed. The Big Short is the winner of this award, and it has a very intelligent screenplay. In fact, I think it's comparable to Spotlight in that surrounds a group of people, albeit not as jointed of a group of people, a bit more disjointed, who are trying to uncover a truth. The variety of personalities that bounce off each other is really fun to watch in this movie, especially Steve Carell and Ryan Gosling. They're awesome. and very entertaining to watch, especially when you consider that it's real people being depicted and written. But yeah, I am actually quite happy that this screenplay won, even though Room is another is a this is that's a more tear jerky, heart wrenching screenplay, whereas this is a more intellectual screenplay. So they're rather different, but they're both quite good. But yeah, the Big Short does deserve this win. The nominees for Best Directing are Spotlight, Room, Mad Max Fury Road, The Big Short, and The Revenant. And I will say that Spotlight is probably the least interestingly directed movie here. It's still hard to deny. The flow of this movie is really well in terms of how it takes you through each of the characters, and especially when they're portrayed so believably. So it is very well directed. But what I mean by when I say it's the least interesting, none of our main cast undergoes that much of a change. And also, the movie is not shot in a super visually unique or interesting or stunning way, which a visual style of a movie is a very important thing to me. So yeah, it's pretty well directed, but not as well directed as the movies we're about to talk to. The first one being Room. Room is another movie that's carried by its screenplay and its performances. However, I think it does outshine Spotlight in its thematic beauty and hopeful nature. Which is just part of the emotional core of the movie, whereas Spotlight feels more informative, almost like a really, really good PSA. Room is much more heartfelt. We talked a ton about Mad Max Fury Road during pretty much all of the technical categories. Um, but we haven't seen it in a while because it didn't show up at all during any of the acting nominations or any of the screenplay nominations. And quite frankly, that's fine. I wouldn't have had it any other way, quite frankly. But it was cool to see it clean up, the way it did in return for the directing nomination, because a movie doesn't just casually win 6 Oscars without having an insane director, working it all, together for the common purpose. The George Miller's vision here is very clear, and it's very effective. Um, he's making some of the best action sequences we have, and how you even go about directing some of the action sequences that he gives us, I wouldn't even know where to begin. So yeah, it's really cool to see George Miller get nominated for this. Now, The Big Short is kind of on the other end of the spectrum from Mad Max Fury Road. The Big Short is really has really great performances and a wonderful screenplay, even though a lot of the technical elements take a bit of a backseat, except for the editing. This movie does have really good editing. But yeah, this movie, I'm not surprised to see it in the directing category, but it's one of those movies that, although I think it should be here, it's not one I would be very surprised if it were to win, which it did. The Revenant won, and I think that is very deserving as well. Let's talk about The Revenant. So I talked about Alejandro Iñárritu in my last video for making the movie beautiful, but this movie is a lot better than beautiful, and it's even more beautiful, ironically. But I mean, this was the movie that kind of introduced me to Iñárritu, and it's so good. This is actually the second year in a row that Iñárritu won the Best Directing Oscar. He won it the year before for Birdman, which I have not yet seen, but I just love The Revenant. Earlier this year, I actually had the opportunity to see it in 70mm IMAX, which it was just so beautiful. It's one of the most beautiful movies I've seen. We've talked already about the gorgeous cinematography, but as well as, it had to be really close to Best Picture because, it won directing as well as acting and cinematography, and got nominated for a whole lot more stuff. And that's all because Alejandro Iñárritu knew exactly what he wanted for this movie. And yeah, he definitely deserves this Oscar. For me, this was between Fury Road and The Revenant. I think that Fury Road would be kind of the cooler pick, but The Revenant is the more artistic pick. The nominees for Best Foreign Language Film are A War, Thebe, Mustang, Embrace of the Serpent, and Son of Saul. Let's talk first about A War, which follows a Danish soldier in Afghanistan who, during a gunfight with the Taliban, calls in an airstrike on a building and then has to kind of explain himself, kind of pay the consequences for the civilian casualties that came from making that decision. I do think the second half of the movie is the most interesting. That's when we start dealing with the court martial itself and the trial that follows. The first half of the movie didn't hook me that much. I did enjoy this movie, but I don't think it's doing anything too extraordinary or saying anything that hasn't been said before and in more interesting ways. Mustang follows a group of sisters that live in Turkey with their very controlling uncle and who's trying to get them in arranged marriages and how they kind of, rely on each other and also kind of how they rebel against their uncle. Although the cultural perspective is very different, I do think this movie works as a really sweet love letter to siblings and what they can mean to each other. Embrace of the Serpent is a very, very weird movie. The first thing I'll say about this film is that it is shot beautifully. I'm not just saying that because it's black and white. The use of shadows and nature make this movie quite ethereal. Speaking of ethereal, the end of this movie took an unexpected turn that reminded me quite a bit of 2001: A Space Odyssey, though not nearly as effective, obviously, as Space Odyssey. But I do think that this movie has some interesting things to say about cultural erasure and the morality of forced faith, as well as idolatry. But it starts to lose me a bit when Karamakade starts telling the kids to forget all of their Christian teachings. There's just some things that I can't get behind. But yeah, this was a really interesting movie at the end of the day. The nominees for Best Animated Feature Film are When Marnie Was There, Shaun the Sheep Movie, Boy in the World, Anomalisa, and Inside Out. Let's start first with When Marnie Was There. And while I am far from the target audience of this movie, it is hard to deny how beautiful it is, which is something that's pretty consistent across all animes, at least that I've seen. The hand-drawn backgrounds never fail to be utterly gorgeous. I did enjoy the first couple acts of this film, but the final act is, I think, what makes it as good as it is. In my opinion, that's where the real true emotional heart of the movie lives. Okay, I'm not gonna lie, I haven't seen Shaun the Sheep movie in probably close to 10 years. And I don't remember too much apart from the fact that the ending was really, really sweet. I remember that. But I can absolutely speak for Shaun the Sheep as an IP. I've spoken a couple times already about Wallace and Gromit, which is a different Aardman creation and actually takes place in the same canon as Shaun the Sheep, which was actually introduced in the Oscar-winning short film A Close Shave, which we haven't talked about yet. We'll talk about that a different day. But this was the first standalone Shaun the Sheep movie. I did grow up watching the show, and this movie kind of acts as like an extended episode. So very enjoyable for sure. All right, let's talk about Anomalisa. So the first Charlie Kaufman movie that I saw was Synecdoche, New York. I watched it in my high school film class, and I despised it. Like I truly hated it. Um, a year or two later, I went to a friend's house and we watched I'm Thinking of Ending Things, which I also just could not stand. I thought they were so pretentious and boring and annoying. I do not like them. And I actually kind of linked those two movies. They pretty quickly actually became a couple of my least favorite movies. I kid you not. And so I kind of linked them together in my mind before I even knew that they were both directed by the same person, Charlie Kaufman. I found out later and I was like, oh, wow, that's crazy. So going into Anomalisa, knowing that it was directed by Charlie Kaufman, I was understandably quite nervous because I didn't expect to like it. But I don't know, maybe knowing what I was getting into before going into it made it better. Maybe his style works better in animation, or maybe the screenplay was really just that interesting. But I enjoyed Anomalisa much more than the other two Kaufman movies that I've seen. Inside Out, however, was the easy winner at the end of the day. Not only was this the only movie to get nominated for any other Oscar, but it was a screenplay Oscar at that. Although it didn't win that award, this one rightfully went to Pixar, which really cooked with this movie. This is not only the best animated film of the year, I believe, but one of the best movies of the year, I would say. And that guides us pretty well into the Best Picture nominees, which are Room, The Revenant, The Martian, Mad Max Fury Road, Brooklyn, Bridge of Spies, The Big Short, and Spotlight. Okay, just gotta say, this is an insane set of Best Picture nominees. In terms of the average movie quality, it might be one of the best sets of them ever. I kid you not. So I haven't seen Brooklyn, but all other seven of the eight nominees, all seven Best Picture nominees that I've seen, are all in my top 10 movies of the year. Like, I feel like they really nailed it. To make this a perfect set of nominees, I think they'd have to have Inside Out and Sicario. But apart from that, they did a darn good job. So yeah, let's get into it. Let's start with talking about Room. This is subject to change, but at the moment, this is my favorite movie of the year. The emotional core just swept me away. It has such a huge heart. Yeah, I don't know what to say. I probably would have voted for this movie, but there's a lot of great ones, such as The Revenant, which is my second favorite movie of the year, and this was actually probably very close to Best Picture, not just because it won like cinematography and actor is pretty telling, but also director, which I tend to see as the most telling award. Yet it lost. This is probably the movie that should have won Best Picture, in all honesty. But they may not have wanted to give Iñárritu two Best Picture nominees in a row because Birdman won Best Picture the year before. I hope that's not the reason, but it may be. Okay, The Martian, another favorite of mine. It goes down easy and is incredibly believable. After watching it, actually, I fully knowing, by the way, that we've never set foot on Mars, I did kind of have to double check and make sure, like, was this based on a true story? Just because it feels that believable. It presents you with the concept, and you can. It's just so easy to be like, yeah, of course. So yeah, it feels so real. It's really believable. It's a great movie all around. Mad Max Fury Road is about as far from Oscar bait as you can get. This is an action-packed sequel that managed to be one of the best movies of the year, almost exclusively for being awesome. I'm glad the Academy had the class to recognize it because it is awesome. It's a badass movie. It's the definition of awesome. It's pretty hard to not love all the action being thrown at you. I adore this movie. As enjoyable as Bridge of Spies is, it's not quite as compelling as some of the movies that we've just talked about. Obviously, it's helmed by Hanks and Spielberg and written by the Coen brothers and is about Cold War politics. It's right up my alley, and it is interesting and admittedly one of my favorite movies of the year, as kind of all of these are. But at the same time, the competition I think was a bit too steep for this one to have a real chance. The Big Short goes down really easy. Gosh, I can't get over this lineup, how good it is. They did such a good job picking the best movies of the year for this Best Picture category. The Big Short is no exception. It belongs here alongside all of these other films. I mean, they're all so good. But which one does the Academy believe is the best? They said that the best movie of the year was Spotlight. And here's the troubling thing. I do love this movie. Like I said, it's in my top 10 films of the year, albeit pretty close to the bottom. But of all the movies we just talked about, it's my least favorite. At the end of the day, Bridge of Spies is simply more up my alley, and all the other movies I think have a lot more going for them in terms of their overall quality and what they're doing. I mean, The Revenant won Best Directing and Actor and Cinematography. Um, Mad Max Fury Road won 6 Oscars, more than any other movie this year. Spotlight only won original screenplay and nothing else. And The Big Short won adapted screenplay, the other screenplay award, and I think it's also more it's a better movie. It's more interestingly edited. I don't like talking about a movie that's this good like this, but just with all the other nominees, this was just a really weird pick to take home the Best Picture Oscar. And after what's a great video about all these amazing movies, it's just a little bit of an underwhelming conclusion at the end of the day. Okay, that wraps up this video. Thank you guys so much for watching. What was your favorite movie of this year? There's a lot of great ones. Leave it in the comments. And yeah, the next video we're going to be doing is going to be covering the 89th Academy Awards, honoring films released in 2016, so the very next year. So go ahead, watch those movies, and I'll see you there.